We're now recording.
For it.
All right. So I wanted to do this presentation. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So I put this together because I'm going to be giving a talk in Oregon as well, and to kind of help people understand why we need to work on climate policy, and that it's just not going to solve itself. I wanted to start out with a wonderful story that individual actions can make a huge difference. So this is a picture of Dr. Thompson, who is a neonatologist by training, but runs the Anderson Lutheran Health System in Wisconsin, which is combined of 4 hospitals and over 75 clinic buildings. And actually, Alan, I'm going to ask you to mute, or there's a radio, or Michelle, maybe that's you, I don't know. Anyway, Dr. Thompson had to raise healthcare costs for his system because the cost of electricity had gone up so much. And of course, we all know that hospital systems run 24/7. And he, in 2007, said, that's really not a good thing. We are buying electricity from coal-burning power plants, and that's not good for health. We're raising rates, which is not good for our patients. So he set out and convinced his board that it was very important for them to set goals to reduce their energy consumption and improve their whole system. And as of 2014, or perhaps early this year, his system is run on electricity that is renewable. It's a combination of solar, wind purchases, even combining with the local brewery and using their methane off gas to run part of the electricity system. So this is the power of one person working with the system that can make huge changes by looking at what are the values that we want to run the system by. Well, the Lancet Commission, of course, the Lancet is a British medical journal. This is their second report, and they basically, of course, state that climate change is happening. There are health impacts already, and over time, within the next century, there's potentially catastrophic risks to human health. Action on the causes of climate change could also result in the greatest global health opportunities that we could achieve by cutting the burning of fossil fuels. The third major component conclusion that they made was that achieving a decarbonized global economy with the public health benefits that that offers is not a technical or economic question anymore. It's a political question. It's a question of doing the right thing and having the political clout to make that happen. And their conclusion as well was that the health community is absolutely essential to accelerate the progress to creating new laws and policies to tackle climate change, just the same way that the health community did with sanitation and with cutting tobacco. So just to step back for a second, I wanted to put out the question about what is good health? Oops. And normally I would wait for answers, but I'm just going to run through this really quickly. Good health requires food. It requires a place to live that's protecting people from the elements. It requires clean air. It requires the ability to have clean water that's safe to drink, safe from contaminants as well as from organisms, as well as infrastructure. So we need electricity systems for our hospitals and our clinics, for technology. We need all of these things in a first world situation. Without them, our health runs into trouble. So I just wanted to ask what kinds of health impacts of climate change that you've seen, or what you view as the biggest effects of climate change. And feel free to just speak up here, unmute yourselves.
So this is Michelle in Minnesota. One of the things I've learned recently for climate change in our areas, the ticks have been spreading across the state even more, and they have a longer growth period to stay alive and harm people. Also, allergy seasons are getting worse in our region, and doctors are starting to treat patients with steroids instead of the typical over-the-counter allergy medicine. So that's definitely a change that's seen on a more everyday level, while going international, I mean, I'm going to see a lot more severe weather like in Southeast Asia, and just how there's many more people living on the coastlines there and are definitely impacted by natural disasters that are becoming more frequent.
Great. Alan, did you want to add anything?
Muted.
Well,
Unmuted.
I guess our biggest threat here is always the threat of hurricanes on the Gulf Coast, and we saw how devastating Katrina was. And, you know, we have to face up to the fact that stronger and more frequent storms are likely as part of the package of destabilizing climate.
Great. And again, with Katrina, as you said, with the sea level rise and the increase in storm surge, the flooding actually was a major impact of that particular storm. So I just wanted to go to this next chart, which comes from the Lancet Commission report. And on the left in pink, the direct effects, of course, are the increased severity of storms, increased severity and frequency of drought, flooding, heat waves, and the fifth one, which isn't on there, is actually sea level rise. Of course, all of those direct impacts of climate change have impacts on the things that we need for our health: water quality, air pollution, pollen, ozone, land use change, so saltwater intrusion on our wells, inundating crops, and the ecologic change. And all of these are filtered through who we are, where we live. So people who are very young or very old are going to be more impacted by heat waves. People who have underlying health problems are going to be more impacted by Lyme disease or dengue fever. People who are lower in socioeconomic resources, such as those people whose homes were demolished in Hurricane Katrina, are unable to rebuild or come back to the city where they lived, whether or not they have family networks to go to in terms of social capital. And then the public health infrastructure. So, Alan, as you were saying, in Hurricane Katrina, the hospital systems, especially the hospitals that served those who were poor, were not rebuilt right away, and more people were on Medicaid because of the storm, or were unable to get insurance at all. And all of those result in the actual health impacts, so increase in allergies, malnutrition, mental illness, infectious diseases, respiratory diseases, injuries, and so on, all coming from climate change. Just to point out a few in specifics, temperatures across the world, around the world, have gone up already 1.5 degrees, and the vast majority of that increase has come since 1970. I had to change this slide, sad to say. When I first made this slide a couple of years ago for the last IPCC report, our current trajectory with business as usual, meaning we weren't going to put in place any new policies, the estimation for temperature rise was 7.2 degrees Fahrenheit, and now it's 8.1. So we're actually we're doing worse. People don't often think about what that means for higher summer temperatures and the resulting heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and death that occurs especially for people who have no air conditioning, are older, work outside, work in the fields, and live in third world countries in particular. This map comes from the National Climate Assessment, which is an excellent resource if people want to learn more about how climate change is impacting us already and what to expect in the future. These are changes that have already occurred in the last 5 decades. Marked increase in heavy precipitation events, with the worst being in the Northeast, in the Midwest, and the Southeast, which of course results in floods. Flooding is just horrible. Water damage in buildings, in houses, overflows to sewers, which back up and cause water treatment problems, more exposure to infectious diseases, mold, damage to infrastructure such as roads, bridges, and of course our own health system. The opposite, lack of water, is happening at marked increase rates. Obviously, we've heard about the terrible drought that's occurred in California that's ongoing over the last 4 or 5 years. Similarly, in Oregon, this map only goes from 2000 to 2009. In the red areas are those days per year where there's an extreme low flow rate in rivers and watersheds in those areas. Of course, we're absolutely need water, whether it's to grow crops, whether it dries out land and increase rates of wildfire. Soot from the wildfires is a terrible particulate problem, increasing cardiovascular and pulmonary disease. It's estimated that half the world's fresh water may be lost by 2100 if we stay on the same trajectory of climate change. And of course, all of these culminate in problems with agriculture production. Drought, floods at the wrong times can wash away crops. When it's warmer, there's more water evaporation, requiring more irrigation. And then sea level issues. It's estimated in the next 30 years that about 15% of Bangladesh will not be able to be used as agricultural land because of ocean encroachment of salt water. So when we look at this issue, the obvious question is, well, what can we do about it? And what we can do about it has to come from, well, what's causing it and knowing what that is. So I would venture a guess that you both know kind of the primary causes, but perhaps you could name the top 2 or 3 causes of climate change in the United States.
Emissions, for one.
Emissions
from coal-fired power plants.
Okay.
To
electricity system. Okay.
What'd you say?
From the electricity system. That's number 1. It's come down. It's estimated to be 31% of our greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, what's number 2?
What about factory emissions, industry?
Industry is number 3. Number 2 is actually transportation. So burning gas, diesel, and airline fuel is 27% of U.S. emissions. Industry is third at 21%. And then heating and cooling our commercial and residential buildings is the 4th, and agriculture is the 5th. Worldwide, agriculture or loss of the ability to take in carbon dioxide from our forests is higher than it is in the United States. But that's kind of the breakdown here. So obviously, the electricity system is one of the first things that people have looked at, and President Obama has put in place, as have other policies before that, increase in appliance standards and more efficient machines that use electricity, and then looking at coal burning power plants and trying to come up with electricity sources that do not create emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. And I'd like to
really quick before you move on, Catherine.
Mm-hmm.
What about U.S. military? I mean, overall, I know I'm not sure if it's worldwide within just domestically. I know that they are a huge consumer of our natural like fossil fuels. How much are they contributing to climate change?
Well, that's a very good question, and off the top of my head, I'm not sure in the United States what the percentage is, but they certainly use a large amount of fuel to run military exercises, transport facilities, both here in the United States and worldwide. But that's a great question, and I don't know the exact percentage, but those are the areas where they're creating a lot of emissions. So as the Lancet Commission noted, the top 2 to 3 of causes in the United States is burning fossil fuels. And of course, the secondary problem with burning fossil fuels is that it's the leading cause of our air and water pollution, either the mining of it, the burning of it, or storing coal ash or waste products. So dealing with burning of fossil fuels will give us a whole lot of co-benefits by reducing air pollution and water pollution right away. So I just love this comic. And of course, somebody in the audience parroting somebody who says, well, what if climate change isn't really happening? And we're doing all these great things when we just really didn't need to. So again, the co-benefits are that we're off of fossil fuels. We don't have to protect the Middle East to get our fossil fuels. We don't have to frack and potentially harm our air and water. We can live within our means in terms of sustainability, have more livable cities, clean air and water, et cetera, et cetera. So with all of these benefits, it really boils down to asking, well, why aren't we doing these things? And, what keeps us from doing that? Certainly one of the answers is that we don't know how to, or we haven't incorporated the true cost of burning fossil fuels, the true cost of shipping our produce from Argentina or South Africa. So the problem with climate change, according to the Stern Review on Economics, is that there is no mechanism currently in place to charge people who emit greenhouse gases for the harm that they do cause, either causing climate change or pollution in general. So market systems, unless we create a carbon tax or some other market mechanism, isn't going to change policy for us or create any solutions for climate change. So, it comes down to then, well, what do we have to do then? We have to look for mechanisms that are laws, regulations, policies in general that reflect our values, that say, well, we do want to protect public health. We do want to protect people who are the most vulnerable. And so there's you know, you guys can say any sort of purposes that you view laws and policies that we need to put into place for any reason. What other purposes are there for developing policies?
I always view developing policies as a way to change the greater environment in which society is living in, so that it is easier for the individual to make a healthier choice, either for themselves or for the overall population. Just by using a policy to change everything around you, that makes it easier for the individual.
Yeah, I almost kind of view it a little the opposite, Michelle, so that we create a regulation so that people who buy a house don't have to determine that this new house was built with the best possible efficiencies in place, but that it's that the society says that's a high value and we want that to happen. So it takes choice out of the matter and says this is the best thing for the common good. But certainly you can't choose to use mass transit if there's no mass transit available. So your perspective is the same as well. So we write laws and policies to uphold values that we hold dear, providing direction to say that we have to address climate change, or we have to address any other social ill, such as access to health care. We want to address that and create policy so that everyone has that outcome. We need to protect things that we use in common, like our air and water, and protecting human rights. So those are just a few of those things. And again, the Lancet Commission, coming back to that, states very, very strongly, as has the last two international IPCC reports, that says we have to enact policies or laws to address climate change because the change is not happening, frankly, at all, and certainly not fast enough to really take care of the issue. So some of the things that I just want to give a few examples of how people are taking action. In PSR, our chapters in the Pacific Northwest are speaking out very, very strongly to stop coal exports from the Powder River Basin in Wyoming and Montana from coming through all of their communities and being exported over to China. Because of health reasons, but also because of climate. So they are putting a policy in place where they are not going to allow increase in exports by building increase in export facilities. I wanted to mention natural gas, or methane, which is now the second highest producer of electricity. And methane is a very strong greenhouse gas. It comes primarily from development of natural gas for use in heating and for electricity, but it also comes from animals, ruminants, cows, goats, like sheep, create methane as they digest anaerobically. Our landfills create methane from degrading food products that we throw into our landfills instead of composting. Coal mining, manure management, particularly from confined animal feed operations, or CAFOs. And we care about this because in the United States, it's the second largest greenhouse gas. It acts locally at ground level to create the third largest greenhouse gas in the United States, and that's ground level ozone. And it's very, very potent. So methane rise, the rate of rise has gone up much greater than the rate of rise of carbon dioxide in the last 5 years. So policy, PSR right now is rating comments to reduce the methane leaks from mining, hydraulic fracturing, methane gas. Unfortunately, these new regulations are only applying to new fracking wells, but we are certainly clamoring for additional regulations or even stopping hydraulic fracturing from occurring. So that's another policy. Policies that implement other electricity systems, such as wind or solar, to be either subsidized, get tax breaks, so that they are, so that companies are incentivized to increase these sources of electricity. So, for example, in Oregon, it's actually now, with a reduction in costs, cheaper to get solar put on your house in a leasing form, so that you don't even have to put the money up front. But policies are still needed in many states that don't allow the electricity to go back onto the electrical grid so that other people can use it, which is called net metering, as well as the creation of improved grids that tolerate this distributed source of electricity. I'm going to skip building efficiency, but efficiencies overall could reduce our electricity and heating needs in half. Many other countries use much less electricity per person than the United States. Oops. So, you know, I'd like to come back to the idea of why policy is so important. There are many things that we can do personally, and I encourage people to do that. So what are some of the things that you two have done in terms of reducing your carbon footprint?
Well, this is Alan here. We sold our car. We got a hybrid, so that gets 40 to 50 miles per gallon. That was useful.
Fantastic.
I bike to work. Actually, I don't even take the car now. I bike to work as often as I can, weather permitting.
That's even better. Absolutely. That's great.
And that is challenging here because there's like one bike path of about a mile long in Metro Jackson. The roads are bad, the driving's terrible, but the key factor is actually I only do it because I have a shower at work. I have access to shower facilities at work, and given the temperatures down here, that's essential. I wouldn't do it otherwise. So it's never as straightforward as you think.
That's very true.
You know, but that's just a reason to start encouraging employers and businesses to build in shower facilities. It doesn't have to be a lot.
Right, right. So it's moving the institution.
And one other thing I'll add is, you know, transportation being such a major part of the pie, you know, when you look at sources of emissions, you know, buying local. Buying food locally is an important thing, and we're trying to encourage that actually for other reasons, because locally grown food is better, it's healthier, and we're getting people off processed foods, so that cuts across many things.
That's fantastic. And actually what people don't understand with organically grown food is that the fertilizers used put a lot of nitrogen oxide, another greenhouse gas, into the air. And so organically grown food puts natural fertilizers which actually bind more carbon dioxide in the soil. So locally grown foods are really, really top choice. So just to run through a few of these, eating lower on the food chain, stopping eating beef, which is the #1 in the agricultural system in terms of increasing greenhouse gas emissions. Walking or biking, as you mentioned. Drying your clothes on a line as opposed to running the electricity to dry them. Composting as opposed to throwing food waste in the trash in landfills. Washing clothes in cold water is perfectly fine, and many other things that you mentioned. Institutionally, as on my first story indicated, there are things that we can advocate. Showers, like you said, making it easy for people to do the right thing. New building facilities that are much more efficient with certain kinds of solar gain or protection from the sun, particularly in the south. The use of local electricity sources and energy efficiency purchasing kinds of concepts are really useful. Actually, I pulled this down because I'm going to Oregon, and some universities, and I don't know about the University of Mississippi, have been encouraged to create climate plans. And you can go online and see whether or not your university has a climate plan. It's pretty interesting at Oregon State that they created a climate plan in 2009 and initially dropped their emissions, but they're not going to reach their goal of 75% reduction by 2025, which is very, very high, a very high standard to achieve. And getting involved in institutional choices and advocating for improvements where people work and go to school is really, really important. The second thing, Paris, of course, the climate conference that's coming up at the end of this month in November is really kind of concerning. Many, many more countries have stated what their plans are, including the United States, including China, Mexico, and a whole slew of others. But unfortunately, they're combining all of these will only get us to 6.3 degrees temperature rise as opposed to the target by 2100 of 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So we have to work faster and engage more people in this kind of activity so that we can avoid really catastrophic climate change. So again, it's really important for us, I think, to make personal choices so that you can encourage others, help your organizations, and of course do governmental actions, whether it's city, state, or federal. And we need everybody's voice. It's so very important for all of us to be advocating, especially those who are in the health professions. The health professions are natural advocates. They care about public health. And lawmakers need to hear and value their opinion. They're considered honest. They're not swayed. So nurses are number one, pharmacists are number two, and medical physicians are number three in terms of a poll that shows the influencers. So I hope this talk has inspired you to take action where you live and work, as well as in your city, state, and even federal. So I encourage people to sign up for PSR action alerts so that they can take action. Check and see what your school is doing. And Michelle or Alan, if you want to add kind of what actions you're taking.
Well, we have a climate speaker coming up from the coast to address the student body in January, and I'm hoping that will spark a lot of interest. And I think we should really use that as a kind of starting point to ramp up the kind of things we do on campus. I really do think this, this is, I think most people, many people acknowledge that this is an existential threat. I believe even climate change deniers know this, they just won't admit it. And that's in a way a good thing because it elevates this issue to the status of the PSR's initial raison d'etre, which was the fight against nuclear proliferation. And this is a nuclear proliferation issue of the 21st century. And this is another good reason for ramping up at this very moment is, we watch these refugees streaming out of Syria into Europe and all the problems that are resulting. And those people are fleeing for political reasons, but it's going to be the same and worse when the effects of climate change globally really take effect, whether it's drought, floods, heat, whatever. We're going to see this refugee problem just magnified over and over again.
And Syria really did have a very significant drought that stimulated the revolution, basically, particularly because the government there didn't take care of the internal refugees that weren't able to grow crops with incredible crop failures before the revolution happened. Michelle, did you want to add anything?
The moment there's a climate change conference happening in the Twin Cities in Minnesota this upcoming weekend, where myself and other PSR members are going to be collecting signatures from health professionals attending this conference to then send out to urge President Obama to be a change in leading the climate health conference in Paris later this month. That's what's happening here at the moment, as well as trying to get more student involvement. And then on the personal level, like Al and I bike to work, although sometimes I might need to take the bus with the new longer distance to get there. And of course try to reduce eating foods that are, like beef and such, that are more costly to the environment.
Great. Well,
sorry, this is Callum. I just joined the call a little late in the game. But I wanted to encourage anyone listening to this call to also look into Gunderson Health Systems and Healthcare Without Harm. I'm speaking to the point that as healthcare professionals, we can also make concrete changes within our own institutions to address the need for more responsible industry. And I think for a long time it's like, well, hospitals and whatever will do what they need to do to provide the services that they do. But a more creative approach would say, well, we can actually use the institutional buying power of this hospital to make sure that healthier food is accessible for the community at large. And we can also look at what are our own climate impacts, and when we go out into the community and speak with lawmakers or lobby or with other organizations, we can say, look at the strides that we're making in our own backyard, that we're not just going out there and saying, well, this is what everyone needs to be doing, but we're a leader in this in our own industry.
Thanks, Callum. All right, I'll turn the call back over to Michelle. And try and find my guide.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Catherine. Are there any Q&As that we'd like to share? And remember that there's a larger group listening in to this call later.
I would love to hear Catherine's opinion regarding the COP conference, and if we think that maybe security issues will be a major point of discussion given what's been going on in the past month or two, and how that might affect the discussion of green initiatives or of a global environmental approach.
Well, that's a really interesting question, Callum, because they're talking about not allowing any demonstrations in Paris. Some of the outdoor activities are being talked about not being held. But right now, I think that people should be writing letters to the editor encouraging the United States and other countries to take in Syrian refugees and to help support people who are fleeing conflict, that in doing that, we are helping the people who are in most need, first of all. Of course, that's kind of what we do as health professionals. But it also shows that the entire world cares about folks, whether they're Muslim or Buddhist or, you know, any kind of religion, and that when people are impoverished, when they face injustice, they're going to turn to radical ideas and revolutionary tactics that may or may not be useful or helpful in the long run, but they perceive them to be. And that is really driving the increased number of people who want to make change because their life is intolerable, and driving people to ISIS or other sources so that they feel like they have some power over their future. So, you know, it's all intertwined. And I think that message, as I mentioned, in terms of Syria, really needs to come across that the Middle East in particular is going to become the hottest in the world. It's going to be unlivable by 2030 in estimations of climate futures. So we need to begin to address those areas that are most impacted and help people and systems to adapt to the changes, and help us all reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to reduce those changes from happening.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The dimension between essentially security and environment is becoming as clear-cut, it seems, as economy in it.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, I know we have just a little less than 10 minutes left on this call. I'd like to save that time to discuss, hopefully, building membership. So I think, Catherine, we're ready to stop the recording on this call. So if